Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelek Gimmel, and really, I think that that's the last time I'm going to be saying that for a while. Mirz Hashem will be saying it again years down the road, but for now, this is really the last time I think that I'm going to be saying we are holding in Chelek Gimmel. Very auspicious day today. Today is the day that Mirz Hashem we complete Chelek Gimmel, our study of Hilchos Shabbos, with the exception of Hilchos Erevin and the halachas of Haitzah, what we call carrying, which is Chelek Dalet. But for now, Chelek Gimmel, Tam v'Nishlam, not yet, but Mirz Hashem today. So, we asked that our learning should be a zechus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael, Hanasuna Batzara Bashivya Ha'imdim Ben Bayam Ben Bayabasha, Hamakem Yirakem Alei Veitzia Mitzar Lervacha Me'afelu La'ira Mishibud L'Geula Hashta Bagala Uvizman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. Our learning should be a zechus Refuah Shalema for Mashemer Ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak Ben Tzion Ben Dusha Chava Hadassah Bas Serel Rivka Bas Shiraleah and Yehoshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malkachana Gila Shifra Bas Ilana Udal. They should all have a refuah shalema b'seich shar Chelek Yisrael. Let me just see. It looks to me like my mic is not picking up well. Let me see why. No, it really should be fine. You might notice the interesting setup today, and that's because today's share is going to require a lot of visual presentation, an interesting share today with some props, etc., which necessitated a little bit of a different setup over here on my desk. So, we are going to be learning Daf Kuf Tzadik Hey Amud Beis, which, if you notice, is only Mishnah Berurah. We're going to begin today on the very bottom line in the Mishnah Berurah on Kuf Tzadik Hey Amud Aleph with the word V'hinei. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hinei, ad Siman zeh, until this Siman, from the beginning of Chelek Gimmel until now, Be'rarnu be'ezras Hashem, with the help of the Rabbeinu Shalom, we explained the Mishnah Berurah in the Mishnah Berurah, Kol ha'avos malachos, all of the Lamites malachos, v'toldoi sehen, and the toldoi of those malachos, v'gam hashvusim shegodru Chazal, and also the Yisuri Derabanan that Chazal wa Masakin lihi yosyog v'geder lahaTorah, to serve as a protective fence around the Torah, Yisuri Derabanan that we're not allowed to do, so that we should not come to Chas v'Chalila be over on Isurei Daraisa. Hamuzkarim ba'Shulchan Aruch, we've gone through all the Lamites Malachos and their Tolados that are mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. Levad mi Meleches Haitzah, with the exception of the Malacha of Haitzah, sheyavur im yirtzeh Hashem b'siman haba, which we're going to explain in the beginning, the coming siman in Chelek Dalet. V'loi nishar lanu, and therefore it only remains for us, ki im lahatik pai, only to bring down over here, oid eza avos malachos, a few other avos malachos, shaloi nizkeru pai b'shulchan aruch, that were not mentioned over here in Chelek Dalet in Shulchan Aruch. Tahainu, what are these malachos? So first, the Mishnah Berurah gives us a very quick list of what these malachos are, and then he's going to go through them in some detail. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what do we have left to discuss here? Hamenapetz, which right now I'm going to define as combing, but that's not really accurate. Combing wool or other fabrics. Va'atoiveh, spinning fibers into thread. V'hamesech, setting up and stretching out the warp threads for weaving, which again, we'll see what that is. V'ha'oiseh shtei batei nirin, setting up what we call in English two heddles, and I'll show you what that is for weaving. V'ha'oirig shnei chutin, weaving two threads, which we'll have to see precisely what that means. V'ha'poitzeah shnei chutin, and removing two threads from fabric that has already been woven. Unevarem achas la'achas, and now, says the Chavetz Chaim, I will explain these one at a time. Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah is going to begin over here with what he called menapetz. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aleph, hasoyrek tzemer oy pishtan, if somebody combs raw wool or raw flax, oy sha'ar devarim, or other types of materials, kimoi shesarkin apishton va'atzemer, in the same way that we comb flax or wool. Let's pause here for a sec. Okay, so the first one of our props that we have here today, this is a piece of flax. Okay, some of you who are about my age or older, you're going to recognize this as what we used in the good old days to wrap up our esrig, as opposed to the foam and the plastic that they give you nowadays. Our esrogim used to come wrapped up in flax. This is flax. This also looks similar to raw wool, what wool would look like when you shear it off of a sheep. You're going to get this raw wool. Now, the challenge in producing fabrics is that when you shear wool off of a sheep, or when you take raw pieces of flax, I'm not sure if the camera is going to pick it up. Let me see. Let me bring it close to the camera. Yeah, it does a pretty good job. You see all of these fibers? You've got a lot of fibers going in a lot of different directions. They're intertangled one with the other here. You got a good view of it right over there. You've got these fabrics that are going in all sorts of different directions. They're intertangled all one with the other. You can't make thread out of this. You can't make yarn out of this. What is the first thing that you have to do? The first thing that you have to do is you have to separate, or even if you're not going to fully separate them, you need to somehow organize the fibers so that the fibers can then be spun into a thread or into a yarn. Now, there's different methods of doing this. The most common method when you're dealing with wool or you're dealing with flax is what's called combing or carding, which by carding, you have a board of wood and it's got teeth. It's got like nails almost going up. And you take your piece of wool and you throw it onto it and you pull it through. You throw it onto it, you pull it through. You throw it onto it, you pull it through. That would be carding. Combing would be pshutei k'mashmai. You take a comb and you run a comb through it. Well, what does that do? Well, you know what that does. What happens when you comb your hair? What happens when you comb your beard? You have hairs and fibers that are all twisted and twangled up into each other. When you comb it, you straighten it out, you untangle it, you get a nice, neat-looking beard. Same too with the wool. When you take your comb and you run your comb through it, or you card it, what you're doing is you're separating the fibers out into individual fibers. You're straightening them so that they run together with each other. Now, this piece of flax, I think, some basic combing must have been done to it, where you could see how the larger fibers are kind of running together, and they are somewhat straight and organized. That is the first malacha that you have to do when you have raw wool, when you have raw flax. Once you have your fibers separated, organized, and everything else, then you could start to take fibers, to pull fibers away, like you could see over here. You have some fibers here. Then you could start taking fibers and you could start twisting them into individual thread, into yarn. And what happens is, this is really the next malacha, this is toiva. When you do spinning, you take fibers, and as you pull them from the bolt over here, you spin them, and they come into a nice thread that's spun together, and then the edge of the fiber pulls the next fiber, which pulls the next fiber, which pulls the next fiber, and you keep on going and spinning, and you spin together a nice, beautiful thread or a nice, beautiful section of yarn. But again, the first malacha that you have to do is menapates, which we teach as combing, but it's not really combing. We're going to see there's other methods to do this. The point of the malacha of menapates is to separate and organize the individual fibers from the tuft of raw fiber. One way, combing, carding. So now let's go back into the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah. Hasoyrek tzemer pishtin, if somebody combs wool or flax, oy shard varm or other fabrics, other materials, kimoish sarkin apishtin vad tzemer, in the same manner that you card or comb flax or wool, oy, or kimoish noiftzin hatzemer lasois halovodin. The way you either beat or not really beat, I don't think this is really done by beating. you pull apart raw wool in order to create felt. Now, when people hear the word felt, they think right away of hats. Good reason for that. Most hats are made out of a type of felt. What exactly is felt? So here is where felt is differentiated very, very much from the regular way that we create a fabric. By felt, you do not take the individual fibers out of the raw wool and spin them into thread at all. Instead, what you do is you take a raw piece of wool. Now, this is not wool, this is flax, but it's similar. You take a raw piece like this. Then what you do is you pull it apart. Watch what happens over here. Here, it's all compressed and pushed together. Now, what you could do is you start to pull it apart. Look what's happening over here. See how you could like pull it? You pull it and 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 pull it. And what you've done is you've taken your very compressed piece and you could pull it all apart. Now, the fibers are still all tangled together. But for felt, you want the fibers to remain somewhat tangled together. What you want to do is you want to pull it apart so that it's nice and loose tufts of material. Instead of it being compressed and all completely tangled together, you want to loosen it up into loose tufts. Then you pull out your tufts and you lay them out overlapping each other. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull a bunch of tufts and you're going to lay them out. See what I'm doing here? I'm pulling out tufts and you lay them out next to each other, overlapping each other. Then what you do is you apply moisture. You wet it down. You make like a sheet of this. So you've got all your tufts laying out. Usually you go in two directions. So what you'll do is, let's say you'll make a square. You want to make a 2 foot by 2 foot square, right? So you take your tufts, you lay them out on a surface. Again, loose tufts, but overlapping. You'll work in one direction, like from top down. Everything overlapping. Then you work in the other direction. You take tufts, and now you start going horizontal. Then you'll do another layer, going the other direction. You wet it, and then you press it together, and you compress it. What happens is the fibers interlock with each other, and you're going to end up with a sheet of fabric. Now, it's not woven fabric. It's felted fabric. It's compressed together. The fibers have interlocked with each other. Through the moisture, they bind to each other, and you're actually going to have a single piece of fabric that you could hold up. Not only that, you do it the right way, and the fibers are of the right size, and you make a piece like this, you could turn it into a hat. Now, the first part of this malacha, of doing this felting, is the first step where you pulled apart the fibers. That is the av malacha of menapetz. The same way combing the fibers apart to separate them and straighten them and organize them is considered menapetz. Over here by the felting, where you pull them apart, that is also menapetz. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah is referring to over here. Like he says, the way you pull apart the fibers of the wool to create felt. Or you take the sinews of an animal. I've got little fibers of flax all over my Mishnah Berurah now. Okay, so you take gidin, you take the sinews of an animal, and you beat them. You actually bang them in order to separate them into fibers. Again, the sinew of the animal is one piece, but it's comprised of individual fibers. In order to separate it into individual fibers, you need to pound it. So, if somebody beats on gidin, he bangs with a stick on the gidin, until he creates individual fibers like threads, so that they can be twisted together. This is what a sofer does. You need gidin. That's what your tefillin are sewn together with. That's what the individual urios of the Sefer Torah are sewn together with. You need gidin. This is how you make gidin. Kol zeh karim menapetz v'chayiv. This is all the av malacha of menapetz, and for doing any one of these things, if you did it b'shoigeg, you would be chayiv a carbon chatos. Aval hamenapetz give oile pishton v'canvas, but in the beginning of the production of flax, linen, is a stalk. It grows from the ground. Now that stalk is comprised of fibers as well. In the production of flax, first you need to take the stalks and soak them. After you soak them, you need to beat them into the fibers. But here, even though the beating of the stalks, high level, looks like menapetz, because again, why are you beating it? You're beating it in order to produce and separate the individual fibers, so it looks, tastes, and smells kind of like menapetz. Says the Mishnah Berurah, not so fast. It's not really menapetz. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'menapetz, aval menapetz kivoyle pishted v'canvas. If you beat the stalks of flax, not sure what canvas over here is, chayiv mishum dosh. Over there it would actually be the av malach of threshing. Why? Shaharei moitzi apishted v'canvas mena gevoylen. Because here's the key real element: stalks of flax grow from the ground. They're gedulei karka, right? And what are you doing? You're taking gedulei karka. You have a stalk that has a usable part and a not usable part. You need to beat the stalk to separate what we're going to call the chaff from the fibers that you're going to use to create your fabric. That's threshing. It's just like by wheat kernels that grow from the ground. You pound it to take the usable kernel out of the chaff. So over here he says you would be over the av malach of dash. Interesting question. Would you also be over menapetz? Sounds like not. V'ayin b'chayod. Okay, that was entry number 1. Entry number 2 we already kind of discussed, but let's read through it, and then we come to the real interesting part. Beis. Hatoive oirech arba tfachim mikol davar hanitve. If you spin a thread 4 tfachim long, so that would be approximately 16 inches. A tefach is approximately 4 inches. Chayiv, that would be in a sidaraisa. If you did it b'shoig, you'd be chayiv v'chatos. Echad hatoives atzemer, whether you spin wool, a pishton, or you spin fibers of flax into linen, oy noitza, or you're doing this with the hairs of an animal, oy sa'arois, oy giden, anything that you could spin into thread. And again, what is spinning? Spinning is you take the individual fibers, you draw them out, and you spin them. You spin them together, and they start to create a thread. And again, as you keep going, the fibers interlock with each other, and you could actually create a very, very long thread. Okay, so if you do that 4 tfachim long, that would be an iser da'araisa. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'lav davka b'kli. You don't have to do this using a keli. We know that there are malachas that in order for them to be an iser da'araisa, you have to do it with a keli, because the derech is to do it with a keli. If you don't do it with a keli, you're doing it Chelek Gimmel. You do it Chelek Gimmel, it becomes an iser da'rabanan. Over here, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'lav davka b'kli. Spinning does not have to be done with a keli, k'moshe karin spin radel, which you would do with a spinning wheel. A spinning wheel was a mechanical device that turned and twisted the wool as you drew out the thread. So you would have a pedal, like the old-fashioned sewing machines kind of, and that would spin the spinning wheel, which is actually turning the raw wool while you're pulling with your fingers, you're pulling the fibers out. So the wheel is what's twisting the fibers together. You are with your fingers slowly drawing the fibers out as you create the thread. So you don't have to do it with a keli like a spinning wheel. Even if you do it only with your hands, this is using what's called a drop spindle. Well, there's a drop spindle, there's a top spindle. A spindle is a very small keli. But when you use a spindle, the spindle does do the twisting, I believe. Yeah, the spindle does the twisting. What you do is you spin it. You give it a spin, like a dreidel, in the other diamond. You spin it, and the wool is hooked onto it, goes through an eye at the top, and you also work with your fingers. But this is done with your hands, because there's no machine spinning it. You spin the spindle as you draw out the thread with your other hand. Doing this would also be an issa da'araisa. Shekach HaDerech Litvais K'may Shetovin Anoshim B'yadayim Al Spindle. Umikramalayu. And the Chavetz Chaim brings a raya from the pasuk B'yadeha Tavu. It says by the Meleches HaMishkan that the women would work to spin thread, and it says that they did it B'yadeha. She did it with her hands. So you see that spinning thread using your hands is considered the derech, and therefore it's a daraisa. Says the Mishnah Berurah, weiter, v'halokei chutin. If somebody takes already prepared string, so you have string, you have thread, and now you take multiple threads, v'shoizer oisam, shekarin in gedrait. If you take individual threads and you spin them together to make a single thread spun out of multiple threads, you're also spinning in order to make a thread. That's also the Yisod Daraisa of Toiva. V'chein oisa halavodin, dahainu mashakir kapelushin and pilshitzin, harezeh teledis Toiva v'chayiv. Also, when you go ahead and you make the felt, so we saw before that loosening the tufts of fabric is the first step in felting, that's menapates. Now, when you actually create the felt, that is toiva. How's that toiva? You're not making a thread. No, but you're combining the fibers. Essentially, by spinning, that's what you're doing. You're combining and attaching the fibers into a thread. By felting, you're attaching the fibers to make your fabric. That would also be toiva v'chayiv. Okay, now we come to the most interesting part of today's share, I think, which is going to be the malacha of oirig, of weaving. Before we read it in the Mishnah Berurah, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction into the malacha of weaving. Now, what is weaving? So you've gone ahead and you've produced thread, or you've produced yarn, but you don't want yarn. You want a suit. You want a talus. You want a dress. You need a bolt of fabric. You want a blanket. You need a bolt of fabric. You don't just need individual threads. So we all know what weaving is. Weaving is when you take your threads and you weave them together in order to create a big fabric. Now, what's weaving essentially? So essentially weaving is you have your individual threads and you interweave them together, going in and out and in and out and in and out in order to lock them together. And you can make your fabric as big as you want, right? Just keep on going in both directions and you can make a nice, big, beautiful bolt of fabric. That's weaving. Now, how do you do weaving? Well, in order to do weaving, so high level, what you need to do is you need to set up threads going in one direction. So let's say you want a bolt of fabric that's a yard wide. So you need to take individual threads and you need to line up individual threads parallel to each other that's a yard wide. But now all you have is individual threads lined up parallel to each other, a yard wide. And if you want it 10 feet long, your threads will be 10 feet long. So you'll take threads, individual threads that are 10 feet long, and you'll line them up parallel one another until it's 36 inches wide. And now you've got threads, 10 feet long, 36 inches wide. But it's not fabric. It's just loose threads, right? Then what do you have to do? Now you have to take another thread and you got to go in the other direction. You got to go perpendicular. But you don't just lay it on top of it. That doesn't do anything, right? You got to go over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. And now everything is locked together. But you have to do that with how many threads? If you want a piece of fabric that's 10 feet long, right? Now you need 10 feet of threads going in this direction, and you got to sit there and go over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under for a month, right? Obviously, that would be too laborious, too time-consuming. That's not the way you're going to weave fabric. Along comes the Industrial Revolution. Along comes the loom. Now, the loom came way before the Industrial Revolution, but along comes the loom. The loom was the machine that allowed you to weave fabric in a very efficient manner. The rest of the malachas that we're going to talk about in today's shir are all part of the process of weaving. So, before we go into the individual malachas of weaving, let me introduce you to how a loom works. And for those of you who already know how a loom works, please bear with me, but I think you'll enjoy the audio-visual presentation anyway. Okay. here we have a loom. Okay, now, maybe first I should go like this. Collapse it? Nah, I don't think so. You can see over here that I used, 1 second, this is going the wrong way. This has to go this way. Okay, here we have a loom. Now I'm gonna bend it to you like this. Here you see I have blue threads and red threads alternating, right? Now, as I told you before, when you want to make your fabric, right, you have to lay out, you want a piece of fabric 10 feet long, you have to lay out threads going this way that are 10 feet long. Okay, here are your threads. Your threads are going this way. They're parallel to one another, and they are alternating blue and red. So we're going to have a nice fabric that's going to be comprised of two colors. It's going to be comprised of blue and red. Let me adjust the angle of the camera a little bit. You might see less of my face, but you'll see more of the presentation, and I think that's more important. Now, what we still don't have over here, we have threads going this way, but we don't have any threads going that way, right? So here's going to be our thread that's going to go in the other direction. It's going to go across, and it's going to go perpendicular to the other threads. Now, the problem is, like I said, what am I supposed to do? Sit here for a year going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth? That's ridiculous. It's too time-consuming, too laborious. So we have a loom. Now, before I show you more about how this part of the loom operates, let me just show you something else. It would be really convenient if these pieces over here would cooperate with each other and they would stay the way they're supposed to. Stay. Nice doggy. Okay, I'm just going to turn the camera a little bit. Okay. You see this? You see this over here? Okay, I always have to remember that the camera is mirror image. So my hand went that way. It's supposed to go this way. This is a bar. All of our threads that are going in this direction are tied to a bar on this end, and they're also tied to a bar on this end over here. Okay, they're tied to a bar here. I said stay. Okay. Boy, of course, when I set up the share, this never folded. Now it's folding. Okay, so these threads that are going across in this direction, they are tied to a bar on each end. And I'll just mention over here right now that we're going to see that one of the avos malachos that are part of the weaving process is called mesech. Mesech is setting up these threads that go across, and these threads are called the shesi. In Hebrew, we know shesi and erev, right? We always talk about in all halachas that have anything to do with threads or ropes going in different directions, there's shesi and erev. These are the shesi threads. In English, these are the warp threads. The warp threads are the shesi threads. They're the ones that go the length of the loom in this direction. When you set these up, so you set them up on one end, you set them up on the other end, and you pull them apart, you tighten them across, that is the malach of mesech. That's setting up your warp threads. Now, as far as the operation of the loom, you don't need to see the two ends, you need to see the middle. Now, what we need to do is, we need to be able to introduce our erev thread, in English our weft thread. We need to be able to introduce this thread into the weave. And we need it to go over, under, over, under, over, under, which is why, by the way, I use two alternating colors of threads here. So we need, when it goes in this direction, when it goes from me and it goes across that way, it's got to go, let's say, over the blue, under the red, over the blue, under the red. When it comes back, it's got to go in the other direction in order to create a weave. How can we do that easily? Comes along these two devices over here, which in English are called harnesses, and you can see that they have holes and spaces in the middle. Those are called heddles. In Gemara, those holes are called batei nirin. Now watch this amazing feat. The way the loom is set up is that each one of these frames, each one of these harnesses has holes in the middle, right? The threads pass through the two frames. They go through, let's say on this frame, the red thread is going through a hole, but when it comes to this frame, it doesn't go in a hole. It goes through a slit. It goes through a gap. And so too with all the other threads alternating. Now watch what happens when I raise one frame and leave the other one in position. Wow, look at that. All the red threads went up. And now you could see that there's a significant gap between the red threads and the blue threads. You know what that gap allows me to do? It allows me to take a weft thread on this ball of yarn. They used to use a wooden device called a shuttle that would be holding this weft thread. It allows me to take it and throw it or easily pass it through the gap. Now, because I passed it through the gap, right now it's laying on top of all the blue threads and under all the red threads. Then I do this. I raise the other frame. Now all the blue threads went up and all the red threads are down. Now I take the shuttle and I pass it through in the other direction. Now it went over the red threads and under the blue threads. Now I go back down. I now have created a weave. I have now passed the weft thread twice through the weave. It's not showing up well on the camera. It'll show up better on the camera if I tighten it, which I'm going to attempt to do while holding it in the camera. I think you could more or less see the results of the weave. And if you keep on doing this, you keep on going, you raise, oops, the chair fell out from under me. That's not a good thing. Pull it back, get back here. Okay. As you keep on doing this, so you keep on raising, lowering, raising, lowering, raising, lowering, and you keep passing the shuttle with the Erev thread, with the weft thread, across and back, across and back, across and back. And as you go across the loom, you're creating woven fabric. Now, the poles at the end were on cranks, so you could turn them. So as you're creating woven fabric, you crank the pole on one end. On the other end, the warp threads, right, the chessie threads, are wrapped around the other pole. So you just keep turning the poles, and you keep feeding in open yarn, and you keep weaving back and forth. The finished fabric is rolling up on one side. The loose warp threads are together on the other side. So there you have your loom. And now, based on that, I hope, clear introduction, now we can understand the rest of the malachas of weaving. Now let's bring the Mishnah Berurah back. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Gimmel. Ha'ois shtei batei nirin. When you set up two batei nirin. What does two batei nirin mean? So these were the batei nirin, the harnesses with the heddles, right? These eyes, these holes over here, these are the batei nirin. When you take two threads and you pass them through two heddles, so you take a red one and you pass it through the eye, through the heddle on this frame, and you let it pass through the gap on the other frame. Then you take a blue piece of yarn, and you put it through an eye, through a heddle on this frame, and through a gap on that frame. Now, the minimum that you need to weave is two warp threads, right? You need two warp threads going in this direction, so you could go over one and under the other in order to create a weave. So, when you set up two heddles, says the Mishnah Berurah, that's an Issa Daraisa. It's a Malacha Daraisa. Setting up two heddles is an Issa Daraisa. They go through this in great detail, much more than I did, because this is one variation of a Oisa Shtei Batei Nirin. We're going to see another one now, too, says the Mishnah Berurah. Now, this is very nice that this is the Malacha of Oisa Shtei Batei Nirin when you're using this scenario, when you're weaving on a loom. But there are items that are woven that are not on a loom. Let's imagine you're taking reeds and you're weaving a basket. Now, when you weave reeds together in a basket, you don't set it up on a loom. You sit there, you work by hand, you go in, out, in, out, in, out. You weave. Kind of like this over here. So imagine these pipe cleaners are reeds, and I'm weaving them together. I'm not setting them up on a loom. So is there Oisa Shtei Batei Nirin on this? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yes. If you're weaving together a basket a sieve, a larger basket, a svach, I believe, is a hairnet. Oisha aragnita b'chavalim, or you're making a bed, a primitive bed, a frame, and then ropes that are woven, or straps that are woven, going across the bed frame to support the mattress. Vuadin b'kash, or you're doing it with straw, or b'choldavar, or any other materials. Harezet toiledes oisenirin. Setting that up would be a toilad of the malacha of oise shtei batinirin. When are you over it? Umishayase shnei batim chayiv. You're over when you do 2 squares. Upirish Rashi explains the halaklav nirin mamish. It's not really nirin elo shemisharshu markiv chut echad b'shesi melamata ve'echad melamata u'maimin hashesi bahem kitikunai. What he seems to be saying is like this. I showed you on the loom that oise shtei batei nirin is the malacha of passing 2 warp threads through the harnesses. On one harness it goes through a heddle, on the other harness it goes through a gap. And now you set up a second one. This one is going to go through the gap on the first harness, through the heddle on the second harness. That is oise shtei batei nirin. What's the ikar of the malach of shtei batei nirin? You're fixing 2 warp threads in place so that you can then weave the weft thread through them. Well, says Rashi, when you're working without a loom and you're working with reeds or other materials in order to make a basket or something else, what's oise shtei batei nirin? Well, imagine that the green threads are the warp threads that are going this way, and the yellow and the white ones, fibers, are the weft that's going that way. Well, in order to do oise shtei batei nirin, you need to take 2 green pieces, right? And you need to have them fixed in place as warp threads. Now, you don't have harnesses and heddles. So what's going to hold it in place? Oh, you know what's going to hold it in place? A weft thread. So you take 2 warps, 2 greens, and then you take a weft and you interweave it. And pashtus, you need a second one, a second weft, in order to accomplish this. Oh, don't fall apart. Please don't fall apart. Okay, so we'll bring a white one in here, right? And now you have 1 box, right? You see that box there, right? The 1 white, the 1 yellow, and the 2 greens. That, the yellow and the white that are the weft, are going to hold the 2 greens that are the warp in position. And now you could take more yellows and more whites, and you could march along, and you could weave them together to create whatever it is that you're trying to create. Let me kind of arrange these pieces here that are being very awkward and very unwieldy. Right? Oh, please, come on. Arts and crafts was never my thing, Rabbi say. Now you could keep going along and you could keep weaving because your 2 warps, your 2 greens, are held in position. Let me just neaten this up because I'm going to need it again momentarily. I thought that pipe cleaners would be perfect because they would hold their shape, but these are very flimsy pipe cleaners. Okay. Note to self. 7 years from now, when you do this again, get strong pipe cleaners. Bear with me, Rabbi say. Okay, I think that'll do it. Okay, weiter. Daled. Derech ha'argin, it's the way of weavers. Shemoischen achutin tchila ba'irech ha'yariya u'barachba. That means setting up the warp threads. The first thing that the weaver does on the loom is he sets the warp threads going across. So he puts them on a pole on one side. He puts them on a pole on one side. Now again, depending on the width of your bolt of fabric, you might have an awful lot of warp threads. If you want to do something that's 36 inches, 3 feet long, and you're using thin yarn, you're going to have a lot of threads to go 36 inches, right? So the first thing you have to do is you have to set up your warp threads. Now, setting up your warp threads is easier said than done. You've got to tie them to the 2 sides of the loom, and they can't be disorganized. Because when you weave, you got to go over, under, over. You can't go whoops, over 1, under 3, over 2, under 4. No, it's got to be nice and neat and organized. The threads need to be laying perfectly parallel to each other, and they have to be distinct so that when you move the heddles, the alternating threads could move up and down, and not that it's going to get all jammed and you're not going to be able to get the weft thread through. Weft thread through. Say that 10 times fast. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, derech ha'organ, shemoischen achutin tchila b'orech ha'yariyu barachba. First, you lay out and stretch out the warp threads in the length, going across the loom, in the length of the loom, and in the width, the depth of the loom. Ushnayim oichsin zemikan v'zemikan. Usually the way it was done was, one fellow held the pole on one side, one fellow held the pole on the other side, and they pulled to make it nice and straight and taut, and then to set it onto the loom. Now you need a third person. Ve'echad shoivit b'shevet alachutin. A third person would take a beam or a pole and bang on the threads. Why? Umisakin oisam, to organize them and lay them out, zeh b'tzad zeh, that they should be next to each other. You see, especially when you're dealing with more fuzzy and rough thread, not machine-made crisp and smooth thread, they tangle with each other on the loom. How do you keep them separate and distinct? So a guy would come with a bar and bang on them, and that would bang them apart and organize them and keep them distinct from each other. This operation is called mesech. After you have the warp thread nice and set up, and now you take the weft thread and you start passing it back and forth, that's called weaving. Okay. Ha-mesech chayiv, you're chayiv for doing the mesech, setting up the warp threads going across. Va-shovet alachutin, and the one who bangs on the threads until they come apart from each other, you sack them and they get organized. Ha-reza telodas mesech. That's a telod of mesech. And during the weaving process, you need to sometimes pick apart the warp threads and comb down the weft threads. That's a telod of oirig. Vav. Whether you're doing oirig on fabric, oy bekonim, or with reeds, or you make frames. Chalonis literally means windows. You weave together frames out of larger pieces of pliable wood. They would do this. They would weave frames together to be able to throw fabric over to create a shelter. Or you take hair, but hair that's detached from the guf. You take hair. That's all it is, a daraisa. Somebody who braids threads, or hair. That's a telod of oirig. That's only when it's disconnected from the body. You braid your daughter's hair. That's not a telod of weaving. First of all, that's oirig shaloi kederech. You don't do weaving on a person. And also, hair will come apart. Live hair on a person, it ultimately will come apart. It's still usher on Shabbos, and this is the Rabbanon, to braid hair or to take out a braid. To braid the hair is a talad of baineh, building. You're building something. You're building a braid. To take it apart is a talad of seiser. Finally, hapoitzeya shnei chutin. Oh, my beautiful woven pipe cleaners, Rabbi Say, came completely apart. I'm telling you. Not my thing, arts and crafts. That was one of the subjects that I failed in class. I hope it won't be a problem going into Chelek Dalet. The very, very nice fellow, I'm gonna thank him here in public. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he knows who he is. A wonderful listener reached out to me and asked me if he could be mahana me and the shir by sending a whiteboard to my house for Chelek Dalet so that I could draw diagrams. I think I will, Mirz Hashem, take him up on it if he's still so willing, but I have to warn the Olam right away that I am not good at drawing diagrams. My diagrams in my head, I know exactly what they should look like, but there's some kind of a disconnect between my fingers and my head when it comes to drawing, and it's supposed to look like a fish, but it looks like an apple. So my diagrams, I try to prepare them when necessary before share, when I have time and I could redo it and this and that. I'm just not that great at it. I tend to lean more towards trying to use models. I remember last time I built models out of Lego, I built models out of magnetiles, I built models out of wood, and to try and show them here on the share, kind of the same way that I'm doing now with my audio-visual presentations, but I am much better at building things than I am at this sort of arts and craftsy type things, which is just not my skill set. Guess everybody has their skill sets, right? This one is not mine. So I have to, my wife really gets the thanks for today's audio visual presentations. This construction of the loom was really thanks to her. She helped me put this loom together, so you should be able to understand what's going on. Okay, I think my weave is kind of back into shape. Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah now is talking about hapitzeya shnei chutin, which would mean removing. Oh, please, could you just stay together? The white one goes over there. Sorry. Why does everything tangle up? Maybe if I do it a little looser. Let's pull it apart a little. Okay, Rabbi Isai, could you see that that's a weave? I think you could. Whatever. I give up. Okay. I don't think this is so complicated that you necessarily need the visual presentation. You have a weave. You have a woven piece of fabric, right? And now you want to remove two pieces from the weave. So it doesn't matter how big your fabric is. You might have a bolt of fabric that's, like we said, 10 feet long and 36 inches wide. But if you go to one edge of the fabric and you look at the fabric closely, right, you'll see the last two, or the first two, warp threads going across. If you turn the fabric in the other direction and you look at one end, you'll have two weft threads that are going across. Hapitzeya shnei chutin, to remove two threads from the woven fabric. L'Rambam, according to the Rambam, shemoitzi hashesi min ha'erev oil hipuch. According to the Rambam, it could be removing two warp threads from the fabric, or removing two weft threads, two erev threads from the fabric. Ula Ravid, according to the Ravid, shechotach shnei chutin achar ha'ariga min ha'maseches. The Ravid has a different understanding of pitzei shnei chutin. The Rambam says, you know what pitzei shnei chutin is? You wove your bolt of fabric, but it's still on the loom. Now you got to take it off the loom. How do you take it off the loom? You go to one end, to one pole, and you snip. You start cutting it off the loom. You cut two threads, that's what Av Malacha says, the Ravid. Utzrichin Reife Yisrael, and based on this, says the Chavetz Chaim, that doctors, Yiddish doctors, need to be careful. Kishetzrichin chutin mifuradin, when they need individual threads, shekarin knetin, litein alamaka, to put on a wound. I don't know if he's talking about stitching. I'm not sure what he's talking about. But he says, a doctor, Bradley, maybe you could help us out. A wonderful listener of ours who's a doctor. If a doctor needs individual threads for something to put on a wound, first aid, he's doing first aid and he needs threads. He doesn't have any threads. So where's he going to get threads from? Oh, I'll take a piece of fabric and I'll pull out two threads from the fabric. Right? So let's go back here. Tzrichin Reife Yisrael Lizar, Kishetzrichin Chutin B'Faradin, Shekarin Knetin, Liten Alamaka, V'loichil Chatichas Beged Pishton. So they take a linen piece of fabric, Umafridon Achutin, and they pull out threads. Ha! Have a malacha daraisa. So this is daraisa of Pitzeya. Pitzeya Shnei Chutin. Rabbi Isai says the Chavetz Chaim, Kol Zeh Melukat Meharambam. This entire shtickle that we learned today is called from the words of the Rambam, V'achayodam, and from the words of the Chayodam, V'hazichru Teiras Moshe. I love the way the Chavetz Chaim ended off Chelek Gimmel over here with Teiras Moshe. Rabbi Isai, Hadran alach Chelek Gimmel v'Hadrach alon, Daitan alach Chelek Gimmel v'Daitach alon, Loi nistishtei minach Chelek Gimmel v'Loi tistishtei minan, Loi ba'alma hadain v'Loi ba'alma da'asi. Mazel tov to all the listeners who have successfully concluded Chelek Gimmel. Thank you so much for being mezakemi, and thank you to the Dirshu team. I mean, of course, Rav David Hofstetter gets a huge shout out and a thank you and a mazel tov. I don't know. There's a lot of people that are involved. I don't know them. I don't know them by name. I know another wonderful fellow by the name of Usher Tesser, who I'm going to give a shout out to, who helps out. He's, I think, in charge of the technical details of the All Halacha website, and he has a team. Thank you to Usher. Thank you to the team for making everything work so smoothly and for always being there when something doesn't go smoothly and we need some help on something. I know Usher has definitely helped me out a lot personally on technical details of getting the share uploaded and the maintenance of the site, etc., etc. And thank you to you, Rabbi Isai, to the listeners, for giving me the opportunity to be Marbitz Torah. Thank you, Rabbeinu Shalom. Of course, the Rabbeinu Shalom comes first. Shechianu, v'kiyamanu, v'higiyanu, lazman hazeh, for being mezakemi. You know, this is not something that you could ever take for granted. The ability to learn Torah, not to mention to be Marbitz Torah. The Torah Akdosha is the Rabbeinu Shalom's Kli Chemda. Lekach toiv nasati lechem. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, I gave you a lekach toiv. I gave you a beautiful matana. Lekach toiv nasati lechem tarasi al ta'azovu. Imagine somebody gives somebody a precious gift, and then he finds it, laying somewhere cast aside in the garage. So it would be a horrible thing. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, Ki lekach toiv nasati lechem tarasi al ta'azovu. It's not pashut. It's a tremendous zechus that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives, that to not to be able to learn Torah. You take for granted. You'll go to Mishnah Berurah whenever you want. I want to learn Torah, so I'll make some time for it now. I'll go now, I'll go then. The Rebbeinu Shalom allows you to go to the Dalan Shal Halacha, that the Rebbeinu Shalom allows you to go to the Mishnah Berurah and to learn Torah is a tremendous chus. Melavad, to be able to be Marbitz Torah. I'll give a shevach v'idad to the Rabbeinu Shalom Shasamta Chelkeinu miyoshvei beis medrash v'loy miyoshvei kronos. The zechus to be able to learn Torah and to be Marbitz Torah is unbelievable. Thank you to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Thank you to the listeners, and we should all be zeicha to the biaskal tzedek b'mehera v'yameinu amen. And we should be zeicha to learn Chelek Daled together, to start Chelek Daled, to complete Chelek Daled in good health with parnasa, shidduchim, nachas, and everything else. Thank you so much. Be well.